Hi everyone, today I'm going to be recording the next watercolour landscape painting. I've done one already. This is a completely different painting though, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, it's not an issue. This is completely separate painting to anything I've done before. We're going to be painting today Mount Fuji, I think it's pronounced. I think it's the tallest mountain in Japan. And I saw the reference photo and I was like, this is beautiful. I really think there's so many different elements we can explore together. So I'm really excited to be able to paint this with you all today. I've got my outline ready. You should all have a copy of this. If you do not, please let me know and I'll get it sent over. This I've printed straight onto watercolour paper. I've got my watercolours ready to go, 2 jars of water off the screen, and you'll be able to see the colours that I mix. And yeah, I'm going to jump straight in to this painting. So to begin with, I want to paint the tree branch that you can see. It's coming out from the left-hand side, that left corner. And I thought this would be really nice to get in there straight away. So I'm going to use a bigger brush for pre-mixing, which I always do. I'm going to use one about this big. Use this all the time for my pre-mixing. And I'm actually going to mix just a little bit of black. Normally I'd add other colours to this, but I want to keep it really as bold as possible. So normally I'd tone it down with more watercolour, like maybe a brown if I want it warmer, a bit of blue, and water it down. I've just got a bit of black in there. Added a bit of water to it. And then I'm going to use a small brush. This is a size, let me check, yes, size 2. Use this brush all the time, it's one of my favourites. I've got some on my brush there and I'm going to scrape off all that excess and then use this to really lightly paint in this branch. So I've got barely any on the paintbrush. See how light I've kept all that, and then can go back in and dot in this colour very quickly before it dries. Because it's quite dark and it's not got as much water, it will dry very quickly, so you want to do this as fast as you can. We're jumping straight in with that detail today. And then you can paint these really tiny lines that come out. And these are really tiny, so I'm going to take my time, making sure I get them as small as possible. And they do go into the flowers, which we will put in a little bit later. We want to allow this to have some drying time before we do so, which is why I've gone in with the drawing straight away. With the branches straight away. And if you get anything in the wrong place, it's not really an issue, which is nice. Takes the pressure off a little bit. cloud coming through here in the background, so not mistaking that line for a branch. Just thickening up these edges a little bit more as they get a little bit thicker and then really thin. So if you can thicken them up, it's going to really emphasise how thin it actually gets towards the end. There we go, so don't want to overdo it, I'm going to leave that for now. And then we can move on to now the mountain, which I'm so excited to paint today. So if you look at the rest of the colours, you've got a lot of blues going on with the sea, in the sky a little bit as well. I'd say it's more of a grey blue, and then you've got them golden colours from the sunset or sunrise. So going to combine a lot of this as that mountain's in the background and you can see all them colours reflecting through it. So I'm going to use a little bit of brown. We're going to mix the colours till we get these just right for this next section. I'm going to mix this in with some blue. We'll see how this turns out first before we add anything else. So definitely more blue needed. It is more on the blue side, I would say. Usually it's the opposite. With nature themed work you don't really get a lot of blue unless it's like the sky or the sea. I'm just going to do a swatch of this. These swatches are not related to today's painting, so don't get too confused. So you can see a lot of the blue in there. I think I'll water it down. May as well put some in the palette next to it. So I'm going to have two different versions of the colour. So one that's really light, which will be this one here. See how light that is. So if we do swatches both of these, that's definitely lightened a bit more, and then this one here really light. So we've got the two like grey brown colours. Yeah, and I'm going to jump in with these to, like I say, paint that mountain. So with, again, my size 2 small brush, I'm going to use the lighter version of this colour to start with. And if you do look at the reference photo, it's obviously a lot whiter towards the top of the mountain, so we're going to be putting most of this colour on the bottom. So to start with, I think I'll come to the right actually. where that edge is. Now usually with mountains it's kind of like a pyramid shape if you really look at it. What I mean by this is you've got them different faces. So I think for this one there's a little, just like an invisible line here where you've got the shadow. The sun's over here obviously, so that's casting light over to here, and then the shadow is on the right hand side, so that bit's naturally darker, but we'll map that in a second. But the difference between the actual mountain and then that snowy frost that snow area, it's normally it blends together really well, but this is very distinctive. You can see exactly where it goes up to. So I'm going to bring this right the way down. As we come to the edge as well of the whole painting, I'm going to blend that out. So cleaning the brush with that excess water, I'm just going to blend it a little bit. And do that a couple of times, getting lighter each time we come out. One colour. Still using that lighter of the two. I'm going to actually quite quickly paint all of this in, as we don't want it to dry. We do want there to be that wet element, so we can add a couple of shadows and have it blend really easily and nicely. Can keep going back in and adding it so it doesn't dry as well, especially if you feel the need to rush. Like, don't stress out about it drying completely. You still want to take your time. Mountain comes to about here. So we've filled all that in. I'm just going to see if I can blend that out anymore. Not too worried if not. Just putting a bit of water back over everything so it's all very equal in terms of how wet it still is. Like, you don't want them dry sections. And then with the darker colour that we've just mixed, that darker brown, I'm going to start putting some of that in there. So over here, like I say, you've got more of that shadow, so I'm going to dot quite a bit of that into this right hand side. I'd say it comes to about here where it's really just that little bit darker. Oh, and it's coming up really nice blending out, so I'm just going to dot that in, let it blend. And usually with mountains it's very consistent. You can see it quite a little bit in the white here. You've got the little lines coming down where the actual mountain's creeping through amongst the snow, and that will happen with this ground section as well. So I'm just gonna add tiny bits of that going all the way down really. It doesn't need to match the reference completely. I'm not adding more paint either, so it's very much blending down. You've got the dark to light, a bit more there. You can even add more to the darker section and not blend it so it does stand out a bit more. I'm dotting some into some of that grey I've just put down, like the darker grey. So I'm further darkening what I've already darkened. Just going to wet this side again. Again, it's all the same with them lines. As you come further to the left, as I am now, still got a few of them. It's very like jagged the way that mountains look with these edges. So I'm replicating that with my brush strokes. Letting it bleed out and blend. I'm just putting a few through the left hand side, and definitely not as many as the left, but still want some of this darker grey in there. Then looking further up the mountain, I'm actually going to water down this colour even further. So going to be as light as possible now. Barely see it, but it just means there's no negative space with the mountain. Well, to be fair, it doesn't matter that there is negative space, but there is still a couple of little lines that go through that match up to what we've just put down. So I'm just taking a look. Got barely any of that on the brush. Using the tip of the brush, so I've got it angled directly above where I'm actually painting, and just putting in a couple of little lines that go up the mountain. Same for this other side. There's a lot more on the right hand side, again due to the natural shadow that the sun is casting. And with that darker colour, just adding in a really jagged lines, following the outline but not being too precise, letting it flow a little bit more. It's not got to be perfect, remember. Bringing that down into that darker section. Then with this lighter, like the middle grey now, actually, not the lighter one, on the other side, like a tiny faint little but very significant line here. It can then blend out, but like I say, it's really small, but it just shows where I would say the mountain, the shadows just differ. And then I'm going to drag that down further into the right. There we go. Then we can let this dry a little bit, maybe add a little bit more later in terms of the detail for the mountain. I mean, probably will a bit more. Actually, I think it's dry enough now. So with that really dark, just a bit on the brush again, just going to carry on with the really thin lines. And the thinner you can, oh, that was not thin at all. The thinner you can get these, the better. Or maybe a little bit more drying time actually. Can always blend these out if they've bled a bit too wide. I thought it would be a lot drier to be able to do that, but yeah, we can go back in, like I say, later and further darken all of this up with them little lines, but I'm really happy with that so far. And now we can move on to the sea. So for the sky, we're going to want to mix a variety of different blues. The sky in the reference photo, I think it's quite a deep blue. I think it's got quite a bit of grey within there as well. But we're going to focus on creating the bright, vibrant colours and darkening up where necessary. My outline's really going to help with this, as I've mapped in where all them ripples are. So I've got Persuasion, no, I don't know if I'm saying this right. So it's a deep blue, I can't say the word. If anyone can say it, let me know how to pronounce it. I think it's Persuasion. I might be saying that completely wrong. But it's a nice deep blue, as you can see. It's really dark in the palette there. So I'm going to use this and add some water, as always, with that same brush I've been using to do this. You can see that now. It's a bit easier to see when there's water added. So it's quite a deep blue. And I'm going to continue adding water to this to get it quite light, because like I say, in the reference photo there is that light blue element, especially where the mountain is below there. It's really very bright. It's just really lightening this up with lots of water is going to help for this. So maybe even a bit more than that. I want it honestly as light as possible. Might fill all of the space that we've got. See how this swatch looks now. So you see how bright but also very light that is. So we've got that light blue, and then we're going to create a darker blue. Shouldn't really need too much for this, but I'm actually going to mix in that grey, that grey brown, darker one. A little bit of that in there, just to tone it down slightly. Let's see how this looks. See how that's just completely transformed that blue. It's kept it really dark as well by not adding lots of water. And then going to create another colour. So I'm adding some blue. A little bit of this deep green. Now I'd say it's more of a cold green, it's not an earthy green. See how these look together mixed. So I want it definitely more on the blue side. I think maybe a smidge more blue. Just a little dot there. And I'm going to again really lighten this up. I've got a bigger brush actually, so I want lots of water. This is just going to make it easier, it holds more water the bigger the brush. So adding lots in there. To really lighten. Again, I'll just grab some more scrap paper, do a little colour swatch. So they're all the three blues. It's just a bit more of that turquoisey colour. I might actually add a little bit of green into it. I feel like it could be a bit more on the green side. It's just finding that balance, because obviously you don't want the green to take over. It does need to be more blue. I think that's helped a little bit, maybe a tiny bit more. Can see the difference a bit more now between them, but the third one is what we now have, and yeah, we can use this for the rest of the sea area. So I'm going to use that big brush I've just used to pre-mix that last colour, making sure it's clean, and I'm going to use this, like I say, for the sea. I'm going to put it into the whole area, even where this little boat is. As the outline, we should still be able to see it. Just making sure. I'm going to go right up to where there's the dark blue over here, and then straight above it there's like a white little strip. And I am going to avoid that white strip just for now. But the rest, right up to that land area, we can map in with the water. So this is the wet in wet method we're now going to be using. So I'm getting a light layer down of water, making sure to spread this really nicely. I'm going a bit further out as well. I'm going to let it bleed out, create a nice blend out. Usually I'd use washi tape and have a nice crisp edge, but I thought I'd mix it up today and see how this turns out. But yeah, made sure that water is everywhere, mapped right up. So it also creates usually the horizon line, but there's buildings behind it. But yeah, it's nice and straight, that line up to where the sea ends. So I'm going to use that brush that we used for mixing the colours, that's a little bit smaller than that big one I've just put the water down with. And I'm going to use that really bright light blue to start with, and just want a little bit on the brush, so I'm scraping off that excess. And I'm going to start more towards the right, and I'm just going to drag this along, going into where that dark section is. Not too worried about darkening that up, as I'm going to further darken. You can't further lighten, but you can further darken. I'm just dotting this in so it's quite dark up until where you've got that boat, and then it gets really light. So I'm just putting this in there for now, and then you've got these like ripples in the water. So as we come down here, I'm starting to match these lines up to the ripples. It doesn't matter if they go completely into it, as again we're going to darken up the areas that need darkening, but they're following the same structure, like that same flow of the water. We are following that. So I'm just really lightly, see how it kind of, it doesn't change direction. I think the ripples are consistent throughout, but it does just flow a little bit more to this weird angle. Usually if you paint water, I'd expect it to all come this way, like that horizontal line, but this is very much not like that. And then over here you've got these really sort of different ripples. Then again going right up to that horizon line, that dark section, can get it all mapped in. And down here, still kind of matching up these ripples, and it comes a bit more to the side. Going to make sure as well this is all blending out as we come, especially down to the edge. Don't want there to be like weird harsh lines. Do want it to sort of blend out, kind of blur. Dot that in a bit there. I think on the edges it'll look quite nice as it dries. Just a couple. And then as we come obviously down the bottom here, it really does all blend out, get darker as well. So I'm just going to add them dots in. So the paper's starting to dry, as obviously you've noticed added a bit more water down at the bottom to blend it out still. But instead of continually going in with water and water, as it's starting to dry, we can start to further develop these dark lines. So you can just see the reference outline that I've done. I'm getting in these little ripple lines. We come out more down here, just blending that out. These ripples down here again, it gets a little bit darker. But we can then blend out with some clean water. So it does all kind of merge. It's not all them ripples all the way throughout. There are some that are more obvious, like down here and up here. So I'm going to use that size 10 brush now, so moving on to the smaller brush so we can get in a little bit more of a blend between some of these ripples for now, some water, cleaning the brush between each one. A little bit again of that water, just gonna put in a couple of little lines I can see. So I'm going to move on to this dark blue now that we mixed that brown with, and just going to continue to darken and add in these ripples so that again the paper isn't completely dry, so we can add them in and blend out as necessary. So I'm going to put all of these in, then we can blend them out a little bit more. It's very much matching things up, and we're adding layers that are going to really help develop this sea. so you're not completely covering them lighter areas, because you want to be able to see, no pun intended, you want to be able to see the light and the dark and how they all blend together. I'm just getting a bit more of this darker bit towards the bottom. Then again, cleaning the brush, can blend this out. I'm going to focus on blending out this bottom bit first, as I really do want that blend to be noticeable, because we don't have that harsh edge. I just dot in a bit there. So, again, clean the brush, and the bottom, so this side rather than the top there, I'm going to blend this down and back and forth with the clean water. Dot a bit in. I think I blended it a bit too much. You see how it's definitely blending it all together, and it just really does tie the sea together almost. Again with some water. I'm going to use the slightly bigger brush with this darker colour here, just to smooth out some of the edges. We can always add some back in as well if it's not dark enough. I think it is though. Yeah, I'm just smoothing this out and dotting a little bit on these edges. So again with this dark, just going to take some bit further out, like I say, especially the edges. Might actually have to mix some more. I didn't think we'd need that much dark colour actually. So that blue, and then some of that dark brown again, browny grey from earlier. really darkening up mainly the sides, and then you've got that light section in the middle. And we're all still matching everything up, which is really nice to see. Like, I think even through here there's a few of these ripples that then get a bit more prominent. Dotting the colour out again. Just so it blends a bit more. Again, I'm going to go back to that size 2 now. Keep putting in these ripples on this side. And then blend, same way that we did the other side. Really developing this section of the drawing. I'm going to use that light blue again. I think it is quite light still over here. Especially where the boat is, if you can still see the outline. Mine's here. Just going to blend this underneath. Again, taking these edges out, putting paint in between them, dotting it in there. And as we move up to this area, still a little bit, not added any blue, so I'm just going to blend with a little bit of water the surrounding areas, but not going to add any more. So I don't think it's really necessary. Just to really smooth things out, if anything. And put just a bit more of that darker colour, blending it into here. And then I'm going to use the darker colour to add in this dark section that comes all the way across actually. So if I start here, I'm going to start more towards the middle, mainly because it's the area that's not as wet, to see how it goes. Just added that in a little bit. It can blend out if needed. I think down here, up here, there's a lot of that dark section that goes into it. Then up here, maybe blend that bit more. Sort of clean the brush and just taking out some of that paint. There we go. So pretty much happy with this now. I might add maybe a couple more little dots so you can bring it out even further, and just dot in a bit more paint. Couple of dots onto the dry, but I think I'll do some paint splatters anyway later on. And I'm going to use that turquoisey green just to add a little bit of that vibrancy more towards this warm area. So I'm just dotting it in really, and then blending it with some water. So if you look at the reference photo, I'd say there's quite a bit around here, matching up with the lines for them ripples. Just adding a bit more colour to it, so it's not all the same. I think that can be really difficult to do sometimes. It's easy to just assume everything's one colour. I'll probably maybe add a bit more later when it's dry. We'll see how it looks. But yeah, I'm really happy with this so far. So now I'm taking a look back up at the top of the painting for the flowers. You know, the branches that we've put in here, you've got them beautiful flowers that come out of there. Normally I would do the background first, but because this stands out so much, I think if we paint it in, then we can paint around that rather than painting a background, because these colours are completely contrasting with the rest. There's not really any pink anywhere else. So I'm just going to move this palette to the side for now. Might come back to that later. But for this one, I'm going to mix some pink. So this is crimson. And just going to water it down a little bit. Might actually go and change my water and then quickly come back to this. So I've just quickly swapped that water. I think it's good to, obviously I've used 2 jars of water, but sometimes it is needed to change, and because we're going from blue to completely different colours, always swap the water for blue. Blue just, it lingers, it gets everywhere. I always find it like everywhere for days after as well. I don't know why, but I find blue paint just on my desk. Sometimes it's in my hair. So yeah, it's one of them colours and it lingers, and you're going to want to change it every so often anyway. So like I was saying, sorry, got the crimson here. Adding a bit of water to this. I'm going to put some of this in the palette next to that one. I'm going to continue watering this down. So it's quite light, and then this one here, I'm actually going to add a little bit of yellow to this. Mainly because yes, it's its own stand-alone section, but if you do look at the reference photo, it does have that bit of yellow creeping through, and I do think it's to do with the sunlight just casting that golden colour onto it. So I've actually added quite a bit of yellow there. It's created this orangey colour, maybe a bit more. Should be enough, we'll see. Then we can lighten this up. I want this really quite light. Maybe a bit more. So it's a really nice golden colour. So I think, well, these definitely remind me of cherry blossoms, these flowers. Not 100% sure if they are, but I'm going to treat them as if they are. I've also got violet, and I'm just going to put a smidge of that into this palette here. Really do not need that much of this, as we're going to add barely any there. Bit of pink, so we want it to just be a bit darker than the pink we've already got. That's the reason. Put it there. So it's a nice purpley pink. Anyway, so now we can create these flowers, and I'm not going to do it identical to the reference photo. I think that's it just takes too long, and sometimes you want it to look different and unique, so that's the look I'm going for this painting. So I'm going to start with this pink here. Definitely want to match up where the flowers actually are, so around here, coming out of this branch, there's quite a few, so I'm just gonna, don't want a lot of paint, just gonna put in a few little dots to create that like bunched effect that these blossoms have. I don't mind if they overlap. These are the centres of the flowers though, so I'm going to be painting around this once it's dried a bit more. So just be conscious of that. Oh, it was around here. I was looking at the wrong place on the reference, of course. So I've added a few more over there instead of just the one. Not the end of the world. So got a few little dots just to show the centre of these flowers. Then for down here, a bit more of that purple now. I'm going to actually put a bit of brown into some of these, just to really darken. Blend some of that purple into the pink as well. Don't be worried about doing that. As we come out of here, there's a lot of these little dots. Don't think there's any particular centre, maybe around here a little bit, but lots of little dots, and we can shape up the petals around these, which is going to be really nice and fun to try. I think I've actually missed quite a few branches. I'm just going to leave the space for them as we can paint them in. It's not an issue. Bit more purple here. So whatever the main colour is, that's what you want to paint first. So some of these, you can tell they're more of that pinky colour. Some of them a bit darker, so then I'd use the purple first. Bit more purple here. That I think then goes into the pink. And as some of the colours start to dry, you can go back in with the purple. See, there's a lot of purple in this bit here that we could dot in. I'm just going to give this a minute now, just to dry slightly, mainly because we want to add that yellow around it, and I don't want all them colours bleeding together. So I'm not going to give it too long, but we can make a start on maybe pre-mixing the colours for the background. Depends how long it takes for it to dry. Not the background, sorry, the land. And if it doesn't take as long as I'm thinking, we can just mix them colours, then go back in. But I'm going to jump back to this palette down here. So where we've got this dark brown that we used for the mountain, all these colours are definitely linked. So I'm going to use this same colour to start painting in some of the land. So we've got a lot of buildings towards the bottom. I think we'll slightly map these in again. We're not aiming for it to look completely realistic, but for now I'm going to focus on these hills that you can see. So I'm going to paint in the really dark sections. I've mapped some of this in with the outline. It gets really, there's a lot of dark lines. Again, it doesn't matter if we get things slightly off, if anything's bigger or smaller, it's not a problem. You don't even need to, well, you kind of do need to look at the reference photo, but you could just go in and paint really, you don't need to worry too much. But as we come up to here, this is where the flowers slightly overlap, so I'm just going to paint in where I could imagine them petals to be. Mainly because if we paint that whole section in, you're not going to be able to see the flowers over the top of it. So that's just mapping. It's just a little bump I've put in really, just to map that in. I'm going to bring this right the way down. Just getting all them little bumps and sections. Kind of following the reference, but also following the outline and just dotting around that really. It doesn't matter if I missed anything or put it in the wrong place. I think the outline gives you an idea of where these little bumps are, and you can just fit in around that, which is quite nice. See, it comes right the way down here, all this dark section. Got quite a lot of that dark area. Again, we can bleed out. I'm going like this and then using that water, making sure the brush is definitely clean. To create that bleed out. As you come more down here, you've got them buildings. You can slightly outline them now. It doesn't again matter if no one's going to notice that a building's not there. I'm dotting this in, quite a lot of it. Again, everything flows sort of down the same way the mountain does, how it all moved from one side to the other. You've got all them trees. You can just, if you just dot like so, it kind of replicates that. And I'm going to use that turquoise greeny blue colour we mixed earlier as the colour to blend into all this. So I'm just going to dot some in to show you all kind of what I mean. And I'm not going around this dark area, and just notice how it's all blending into it. So it means that green is just going to creep through really nicely, whilst you've still got these bright, these really dark sections. But you can just see the green coming through. So I'm just kind of dotting it in. And dot it straight over the dark areas if you'd like to, obviously. And just that blend. It's not going to make everything look flat, which is nice. You've got that variation. This is quite a watery colour, so it will blend really well. But just don't be careful not to overdo it too much, as obviously it will blend so much so that you can't even see the light green. So I'm just going to let that dry a little bit. So as we come down here, it's hard to identify the outlines. Again, I'm not too worried about going into these sections. So I'm going into that mountain area now. I'm going to put in some trees, so I'm just going to put in some lines as I usually would to paint trees. And then dotting all the leaves in. So this is how I would just paint trees in general, and keeping it quite small. Obviously you're not going to have all that detail, so it is quite good to have a way that's really easy and getting wider. So I'm just doing dots that get wider as they come down, kind of like little Christmas trees. That can then have that green dotted. And then as we come further down here, again there's more trees, more like bush-like areas. I'm just going to dot this in. I might let these dry and then add some green over the top to fill the negative space. So rather than doing the lines, I'm just going in with the dots now. It's all the way across. So I'm bringing this right the way across, and if you look at the reference photo, if you just take a bit of this colour down, it's going to give that reflection, which I always love to do for water. So it's like everything matches up to what's above it but flipped upside down, as the water will naturally cause that reflection. So I'm just getting a bit of that in there. You can blend that out and it looks like it's fading away. It's just a little bit of that. It's just a small touch. It's not that noticeable in this painting, but it just makes all the difference. So again with that green, as things are starting to dry now, really dot that over. I think I've covered the majority of the buildings doing that, but I'm happy about that decision. So you can, with that light blue, maybe go over some areas for the buildings just to show that they are there. I'm not too worried about getting all of this in, if I'm honest. If you keep it really light with the water, you can just add a few windows in later. I think that's probably what I'll do. I'm going to use that yellow that we've mixed for the flowers later. Just put a bit of that there. There's like a little strip. I wonder if it's sand. Just dragged a bit of that through. And with that dark brown, can really darken these trees up. As they all blend together, you've got more of that colour. Just dotting that in there. And again, just a bit of that green. Creeping out the tops there. Darken up that green slightly, just so it blends a bit nicer. Also blending out on the sides, not forgetting to do that. We've done well so far. Just darkening, getting everything sorted now, if that makes sense, like tying all the colours together. So around here I think just needs a bit more paint, but you can still distinctly see that blend and lots of different shades. It's not all one colour, which is what I personally wanted. I didn't want it to all look the same. And I'm going to jump back to that flower colour now. Colours, I should say. So I'm going to use this yellow that we mixed, that golden yellow. And I've just got a tiny bit on the brush, don't need a lot for this. And we're just going to paint flowers around them dots, if that makes sense. So some of them, I'd say, are more distinctive on the left. They're coming away from the sun, but even up here actually. So these dots, you can just shape it around that. So, got a couple of like circles here. You can blend some pink into the middle of these, so it's not just pink yellow. You've still got a nice transition of colour, sorry, but you can really just distinctly see that these are flowers. Even just with the dots. Again, you can go in with purple to blend into it slightly. Down here, painting over it. Little bumps and ridges. Little bumps all coming out every side. It does emulate flowers, which is really nice to see. And they're definitely lighter in the reference photo, but this is, we can always darken behind it, which probably will do, so maybe it's actually not. I think right now it looks it because you've got the white behind. So I'm gonna just keep painting these in. I'm not going up to the edge of that hill or them cliffs, because I don't want to have it bleed into the flowers. Could even go dot dot and like do like a little star around it. That's gonna replicate flowers. If you're struggling to get that generic flower shape, all I'm doing is dotting. It's not supposed to look perfect at all. So again, I'm going to let all this dry now. Could maybe do a couple more purple dots. But we're going to let this dry and move on to the painting the little boat at the bottom. I did have an outline, I can very faintly see it, but I'm going to use that really dark brown. This one here. You can use black, brown, anything that's really dark. And obviously you want this section to be dry. I'm just going to paint in a tiny little boat. I'm not going to add much detail, as yes, I think it is quite detailed. If you zoom in on the reference photo, there's a lot of like white highlights and things like that, but because it's so small for what we're painting on, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to create a silhouette. So I've got that, and then I'm going to put in a little face here, so just a little dot, shoulders, and same for the other side, and just an arm coming out. So I've not done anything fancy, and you can just slightly see that it's a silhouette. This one curving round a bit more. So might want to make the head a bit wider there. Looks like he's got a little hat on there, didn't even mean to do that, so I'm going to leave it. Don't want to overdo it. Put in a little oar there, it's a little dot, and then maybe a line coming in. How did I get purple there? Blend that out a little bit. I've got a little purple in the sea there. It could be a little fish. Always do it, always. It's always on my lightest point as well. But yeah, we'll leave that. Don't want to overdo it, but yeah, definitely managed to get purple there somehow. Must have lent on it. But yeah, really simple for that silhouette. Not done anything crazy. And we can start mixing the colours for the background. I'm going to let this dry a little bit actually before doing so. We'll see how we get on mixing. Hopefully the flowers dry. I think that's more what we're waiting on, the flowers and this hill here. Could actually paint in with that dark brown. A couple of little windows, just a few little dots, just to show that that's there. Shape around that maybe, so it stands out a bit more. Put a few little ridges like so. I think that kind of shows that there's houses of some form or buildings. And then I think the little dots for windows makes it really obvious that that's what I'm trying to get at. So just a few little lines has helped with that. Nothing, honestly, nothing fancy. I think that dark section blends all the way out actually. You know how we reflected it down there? If we do the same down here with a bit of water. Just shows you've got that dark area, just to replicate that reflection. So we've got that bright yellow, and I'm going to create a browny grey like colour, so a bit of brown. That will then mix in a bit of this yellow into it. That's darkened it up really nicely, but it's a bit warm. So if we add a little bit of black to this, it's going to cool it down. You could use blue as well. Just want a tiny bit. I might actually go for some blue. I think that's a good idea. So a bit of blue, a bit of black. Again, not a lot. Just a little bit on the brush. I think that's too much. So it tones it down, gives it that bit more of a grey-like colour. And this can be for them beautiful clouds that we've got within the background. So I'll do a swatch just to share what this looks like, see if it's the colour we want it, or I might have toned it down a bit too much. Add a bit more yellow back in. Let's see how this looks. I don't think that's done much. Get a bit more in there. There we go. So it's got the yellow creeping through slightly. So I'm going to use this slightly bigger brush rather than the size 2 for this, just because there is quite a bit to actually cover. And I'm going to use, again, the wet in wet method. So I am going to wet the whole sky area. And we've got the sun coming out around here, so just be conscious of that. Still going to wet the whole section.
So it's quite easy up here, wetting all this area, and then we get down to the mountain. You want to go very carefully around it. And same with these flowers. Got some trees to add in as well on these mountains soon, but I'm going to paint this in because there is, you can see the background slightly underneath it. So I'm just going to go up to the flowers for now, and then paint more going into them in a second. But yeah, I'm going to use the grey browny yellow, and where these clouds say begin, actually, it's kind of where they finish as it's coming out the photo. I'm just gonna just a little bit dot this in. Now the outline I've created goes around that dark section, and it goes into more of like a golden area. So we come up here, can very lightly, maybe with the smaller brush, go around these flowers. So we're going to really want these to stand out, so going around them is going to help to do that. And then dot some of this slightly around. So I'm really going around this now. Getting in these clouds, making them a bit more distinctive. The little dots. Quite dark over here as we come away from that sun. I'm going around these flowers, like I say, being very conscious that the flowers are there. And then, with this golden colour, you can have this coming out from these clouds. I'm just dotting it. Oh, I think I went for the wrong colour there. I'm just dotting it underneath and letting it blend into that grey, browny colour. same again with this water. I'm going to keep just blending into this now, just so it comes down a bit more. And just need to re-wet it. Got that line for the mountains. I'm focusing more on this side. While I am going to dot in some of that yellow here that while we were letting the hills, cliff top areas dry. And I'm going to put in some of this light blue that we used as the base colour for the sea. So this is definitely more towards this bottom part of the sky, going around the mountain with this, and this is going to make that mountain pop a bit more, because you've got that light section and then it's going to be darker around where this sky bit is. Blend some of that colour out again. And then we've got more of that cloud. Got one coming through. I'm just going back and forth to get that mapped in, letting it bleed into the sky slightly. And putting a bit of blue into it as well. I think this is that area where it goes from the blue into more of that golden area. Bit of blue there. Blend that out. Again, I'm going to get this water down, mapping around these flowers. I think that's quite an important part to map around these. You can use a smaller brush. I'm just going to do a general map and then work from there. With that light blue. And get some of it into them little creases, that size 2 brush now. So I'm still going around all them petals. Up to about here. then cleaning the brush, got this sunshine that we can emulate. Just gonna put some water down where this background bit is. I feel like we could blend that a little bit more. So, got a bit of that yellow on the brush, just a little bit. I'm going to go around here. So yeah, just a little. And then you've got the sun that kind of pops out from there. So, avoiding where that sun will be. Painting around that now. And then you can blend. So it looks like it's coming out of there. Get a bit more of that yellow in. Just to darken. With that lighter, that smaller brush, so with that yellow, I'm just going to reiterate going around where these lighter sections are. And blending it out so it's not completely obvious. I've just painted a circle. With that darker, and get them clouds in there. Doesn't matter if they're not 100%, as long as you've got the general idea. Just dotting it in and letting it bleed a little bit. Obviously if the paper's too wet it will bleed and become very mucky and take over the whole painting, like sky area. So you want to be conscious of that. But if you don't have too much water it shouldn't do that. Mine has not done that at all. And if you do have too much water, just let it dry a little bit. Then you can go in and add water and add the paint down over the top, as it doesn't then matter because it's dried a little, so it shouldn't bleed out completely, as long as it's not completely dry, otherwise the clouds will look a bit strange. So I'm just going to blend out this section. I'm going to clean the brush can dot a bit out like we have been doing, just to show that edge almost. I love how it looks for the sea. I think it will look really nice as well, actually, with a bit of that yellow. Just coming out them sides. Maybe with the small brush. A couple of little dots in the dry areas. Nothing too crazy. So, I think this is a good place to pause. I'm really happy with how this is looking. And I say pause, I'm going to continue the video, but I'm going to let everything dry just so we can get in the trees over here, coming right the way down, and just tidy things up to finish. I think I'm going to extend these a little bit more, the tree branches, but still have them really stand out. Maybe put in a couple of little highlights if I think it's necessary. Don't really think it is though, maybe a bit more blending there. But yeah, I'm really happy with this so far, and it's going to jump now. I don't know how long it will be for me. I think I'm going to leave it overnight, and then we can add in the last little bit. So I've left this painting overnight now, and I'm going to go in with the paints from yesterday, tidy everything up just a little bit more, maybe add some white acrylic paint in for some highlights. But I'm really happy with how this has dried, and I've added some water back into all of my paints from yesterday, and I've also changed obviously the water, cleaned my brushes. So to begin with, I'm going to go in and add the rest of the trees that I mentioned yesterday. So I'm going to use my size 2 brush again, and that dark grey black colour, the same one as yesterday. I'm just looking at the reference photo, so I've blended mine out without that washi tape like I usually use, so I think I'm going to put a tree here as like that starting point, maybe a bit further actually. Just with them dots like we did yesterday. There's quite a lot of water on this, so I'm going to let it dry just a little bit. I'd say they're quite thick up here. There's not really that much leeway. You can definitely see there's a lot of trees in this section. So I'm just going to clean my brush, and I'm scraping off all the excess water. Really do not need a lot for this. I'm just going to blend this tree out on the edge here, just to match up to everything I've done so far with that blend out. Clean my brush again, really get that coming out a bit more, and then can continue adding in the rest of the trees further down. It's really quite simple, not that much to it. I'm going to paint around that section so that you can really see the standing out point of the flowers from that branch as well. So it's just a lot of dots really, there's nothing very clear and concise because it's so far away. Obviously if you was closer you'd be able to see the detail far more, but just a lot of little dots. To really represent these trees. As we come a bit further down as well, there's less paint on my brush and it becomes a little bit more separated, I would say. Like in terms of the dots, there's just not as many. So as we get to around here, see it just becomes a little bit more spaced out. So I'm not being scared to get that in there. And as we come further out here, I think there's a lot more that dark section. Coming more overlapping that mountain now, so we've left that little gap. I'm just go in and fill this in again with all these trees. Definitely a gap that I've missed out for more buildings, but happy to fill this in with some trees. If you have painted that in, you're better at looking at the reference photo than me. But I'm really happy with this. I'm not stressed about getting the trees exactly right. Darkening up a little bit. Going back in up here, can put a little few more in if it isn't looking quite right. So you don't want it to look like you've got a tree, like very repetitive. You want them to look random, so putting some of these back in will help with that. Blending that dark bit out up here. I feel like this could be a bit darker. Doesn't really match up entirely. really happy with this. And now I'm just looking back. I'm going to use a little bit of black. Just going to put it straight onto the paintbrush. So I want it really dark. Just a little bit on there. Just to tidy up and darken these branches. If there's any, I think I missed some yesterday. Just looking at the reference photo. Can't remember where I said I'd missed any. Just darkening it up. Some of the blossoms get a bit thicker as it goes into the actual flower as well, like the actual branch. So I'm just doing that to suit the flowers, just creating a bit more of a thicker line. I think it's here. Might have missed just a couple, not too worried about getting these completely right though. No, there it is. Found it. You can see the outline. When you look at something too much, it's really difficult to see these things. I don't know if that's just me. And then you notice and you're like, oh, that was really obvious. Then also with this black, I'm just going to extend this out a little bit. We can blend it out a bit more. Again, coinciding with that blurry background. So I'm cleaning the brush. Just put a little bit in there. And then we can make this a bit lighter with that water. And I want to use that water quite a few times to do this. Blending that colour out slightly, and as we get to about here, you can blend it out a lot more. Even do a few black dots coming out. I think that would look really nice. Just a few to really show that branch that you've blended. There we go. I really darkened that up as well. I think that looks really nice like that. I don't want to overdo it too much, so I think I'll just leave that now because I'm really happy with it. So once you've got it to that point, leave it. Don't overdo it. So now, taking a look back at these waves, just to tidy up a little bit more. So again, I think I'll swap these around for you to see. I'm going to use that dark blue that we mixed last time. You see I'm scraping off that excess, so you've just got a little bit on the brush. and just really going to detail these waves. So thin lines kind of just going over the top of what we've already done, but these thin lines are just going to darken that tiny bit more, and I'm kind of doing it over like the top, so the top of that blended dark area. That then now goes down into more of a blend. And this just details it that bit more. As we get out here, it gets a bit more blurry, so I might emphasise that a bit more. Putting them back in, so it's just further darkening. And then up here it's more adding detail. And blending these bottom ones out, and it also goes more towards that lighter section anyway, so you do want to blend it out because of that really as well. And then up here we've got these waves again, some little ripples. It's kind of like an S shape, so I'm just mapping these in, really darkening up. As we come a bit more out, yes, there's that S shape, but it widens and becomes more of like a curve, just a general curve, I would say. I'm going to blend these out before I put too many in, and then this dries. Cleaning the brush using that water in between all them little lines I've just put in. Carry on with them ripples. If you want to, just a few more, sort of blur out. Really blending these out as it goes into that light section, but it's just darkening what's already there. I think last time we didn't use this darker blue in this area. Want to get a bit more there. Bit more up here, and then I think again we can leave this area. Don't want to overdo it. there we go. Blending this one just a bit more. It's just these edges that come into that lighter area. A little bit more of a blend. Finding that balance can be really tricky. You could even just dot a bit more darker if it's not blending the way you want it to. But yeah, really happy again with this section. So if you look at the boat area that we painted in, I'm going to use the a grey. So I think this over here is a grey we mixed earlier. Or maybe actually, I think it's this one. So I'm just going to use grey. Just to paint in the exact same thing, just opposite. And we're going to blend this out. So you'll see what I mean as I do this. So, painted the boat upside down. You can paint kind of the body, doesn't matter if it doesn't look completely right. Oh, that's blended far more than I thought. And one there. I'm cleaning the brush, using a tiny bit of water just to blend this out, and it creates that shadow. Might dot a bit more of a dark grey into that. And just blending that out with the water. Just creates a little bit of shadow. I love that. Again, I don't want to overdo it because it's really small, that area as well. And just taking a look now, I'm going to go in with that white acrylic paint. I don't think we actually need that much of this, but I'm going to go in anyway. I'm going to use a different brush as well. I love that size 2, and I found acrylic doesn't like paintbrushes all that much. So just using a really small brush. Taking a look now through the reference photo, so I think maybe this could be a bit tidier, so I'm just doing a bit of white acrylic on top of that mountain, a little bit here. This is probably the most important section, so just putting some in to replicate the fluffy tops of the clouds. I'm going around all that dark section. I'm literally just dotting it in quite messily, not got a lot on the brush either. It just imitates the sun, getting darker as it comes out, so I'm not adding any more paint to the brush. You've got a bit there where the sun is. Clean that and then blend it. So I've literally just painted a white circle and then blend that out with just a bit of water. Obviously it's not watercolour, so it doesn't really like the water as much. Again, a bit of that white. Looking at the flowers now, going around them yellow areas. This is going to really bring these to life. Make them stand out amongst the rest of that background. Love this. See how that's just bringing these flowers to life? I don't know how well you can see it on camera, but just this little bit of white paint, white acrylic paint. Gouache would also work really well for this. I think gouache is the best choice. I just don't have any. But anything that's just going to sit nicely on top of the watercolour. I think through here it's going to look, yeah, see how that, it's got the dark mountains and that around the flowers. just makes it pop so much more. Because it's that darker background amongst the white. You don't need it everywhere. You don't need to like just paint all the way around every single flower. I'm kind of just dotting it wherever I feel like, really. Nice to have it separating some of the flowers, coming out from others, going into some of them more. So yeah, just really tying this together with that white. Really haven't used a lot of it either. And again, just to finish now, can't believe how fast we've finished this. Just a tiny bit on the brush, can get a little bit more shadow in here, like with these highlights, so painting around some of the waves, maybe a little bit here. If you're not happy with it, you can blend it out with some water if it's looking a bit too harsh. Couple of lines through these waves. Really don't need a lot of this. And this is just adding the detail to these waves, really. You see how that's pushing the blue out more. Few more little lines just to match up to everything done so far. there we go. So yeah, I think it's easy to overdo it, maybe a bit more through the clouds with that patchy section. But overall, really happy with how this has turned out, and I don't want to overdo it. Gonna blend this tiny bit. But yeah, really happy with how this has turned out. So let's take a proper look. Just move these out the way. Take that bit of tape off. I only put this down to hold it down, but I think it's naturally made me curve it a little bit on all the edges, which is quite nice. Oh, I love this. I'm really happy with this painting. I thought it was going to be a real challenge, which, don't get me wrong, it was. But I love how it's turned out. There we go. You can really tell what every single element is, which can be really difficult. Like, I love that branch. That's one of my favourite parts. I think that's what I loved in the reference photo that made me want to paint it. So there's up close all them little details. And yeah, let me know what you think, guys. I've really enjoyed creating this painting, and I can't wait to create some more Japanese inspired artwork. I think Japan is beautiful, so I definitely want to continue. Might make this a painting series. If anyone's interested in that, let me know. And I will see you all next time for the next watercolour tutorial. Bye guys!